Teddy Pendergrass's first solo single went top 5 on the R&B chart. His second single didn't make the Hot 100 at all. The man who had been the most electrifying voice in Philadelphia soul, the voice that had powered Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes to #1, the voice that had made women drive hours just to stand in a room where he was performing, was releasing records that radio programmers were ignoring. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff watched it happen, and then they went back into the studio and wrote "Close the Door." "Close the Door" has been sampled 45 times. Mary J. Blige sampled it for "All Night Long on My Life." 3LW sampled it for "Neva Get Enuf." Across 45 uses in 45 different songs by 45 different artists across 3 decades, the specific qualities of the recording, the voice, the production, the specific intimacy of what happened in Sigma Sound in 1978, have been extracted and placed inside new contexts, new songs, new eras of popular music, because the thing the recording contained was durable enough to survive the extraction and relevant enough to make the new songs work. That is what the right song for the right voice produces. Something that keeps being useful long after the moment that produced it has passed. The story of "Close the Door" begins not in a recording studio but in a Puerto Rican club in Philadelphia in the early 1970s, where a drummer named Teddy Pendergrass was playing behind Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes on a night that had no particular reason to be significant. Harold Melvin was in the lobby when he heard a voice he did not recognize singing Eddie Holman's "Hey There, Lonely Girl." He walked back to the bandstand. His drummer was singing, not performing, not showing off, simply singing the way some people sing when they are not thinking about whether anyone is listening. Melvin listened. He heard what was there. He walked back to the bandstand and he found his lead vocalist without having looked for one. Teddy Pendergrass had been a drummer his entire musical life. He had played his way through the Philadelphia club circuit in a role that required technical skill and musical instinct and the specific kind of invisibility that rhythm section players occupy in relation to the performers out front. He had not been building toward being a frontman. He had not been waiting for the moment when someone in a position of authority would hear his voice and understand what it could do. He was playing drums in a club and singing to himself, and Harold Melvin happened to be in the lobby. Within 2 years, Teddy Pendergrass was the face and voice of one of the most successful groups in Philadelphia soul. When the latest lineup of Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes signed with Philadelphia International Records, Teddy was out front. His voice on "If You Don't Know Me By Now" in 1972 powered the group to #1 on the R&B chart and #3 on the pop chart. The specific quality of what he brought to that recording, the vulnerability underneath the power, the sense of a man who was genuinely feeling the thing the lyric described, rather than performing it from a professional distance, made the record, something that radio programmers could not ignore and audiences could not forget, hit after hit followed. "Wake Up Everybody," "Bad Luck," "The Love I Lost." The Blue Notes became one of the defining acts of the Philadelphia International roster, and Teddy's voice was the reason. Women organized their lives around the concert schedule. They drove long distances. They waited in lines that stretched around the block. They screamed. They sent flowers to the stage. The specific effect that Teddy Pendergrass's voice had on female audiences was something that concert promoters and venue managers and road managers all had to account for operationally, had to plan around, build into the security arrangements, factor into the crowd management calculus. It was not a metaphor. It was a logistical reality. The split between Teddy Pendergrass and Harold Melvin was not clean, and it was not simple. It was the kind of professional separation that happens when a voice outgrows the vehicle it was discovered in, when the marquee name and the actual draw have diverged to the point where both parties understand the divergence and draw different conclusions from what it means. Harold Melvin understood that Teddy Pendergrass was the reason the audiences came. Teddy Pendergrass understood the same thing. The conclusions they drew from this shared understanding were incompatible. Teddy left. He signed with Philadelphia International Records as a solo artist, staying at the label that had been home to the Blue Notes, retaining the relationship with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff that had produced the hits, but stepping out from under the Harold Melvin name and into the space where the audience's relationship was directly with him rather than with the group that had first presented him. It was, on paper, exactly the kind of move that the evidence of the preceding 4 years suggested he should make. The first solo single, I Don't Love You Anymore, was written by Gamble and Huff as a statement of intent, a record that announced Teddy Pendergrass as a solo artist on his own terms. It went top 5 on the R&B chart. It reached number 41 on the pop chart. It was a reasonable start for a debut single, the kind of chart performance that a new solo artist could build from. The second single did not make the Hot 100 at all. Radio programmers were not connecting with what they were hearing. The voice was there, undeniably, unmistakably there, but something about the material was not giving it the context it needed to do what everyone who had been in a room with Teddy Pendergrass knew it could do. Gamble and Huff watched this happen. They had been making records long enough to understand the difference between a voice problem and a song problem. This was not a voice problem. This was a song problem. They went back to the writing room. Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff had built Philadelphia International Records into one of the defining labels of the early 1970s, had written and produced records for the O'Jays, for Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, for Billy Paul, for a roster of artists whose combined output across the years from 1971 to 1976 had defined what Philadelphia soul sounded like to the rest of the world and had given the city a musical identity as specific and as internationally recognized as Motown had given Detroit in the previous decade. They understood what a voice needed from a song. They had spent their careers understanding exactly this, studying the relationship between material and performer, identifying what a specific voice required in order to do its best work, writing songs that gave a voice what it needed rather than songs that a voice had to struggle against. They had heard Teddy Pendergrass's voice for years. They had heard it in the Blue Notes recordings and in the live performances, and in the specific way that audiences responded to it. The involuntary response, the response that happens before a listener has decided to respond, the response that is not a reaction to the performance, but a recognition of something in the voice itself. They understood what the voice needed from a song. It needed intimacy. It needed the kind of material that allowed the specific quality of close, direct, personal address that Teddy's voice produced to be the point of the song rather than a byproduct of it. The first 2 solo singles had been good records. They had not been the right records. They had not been built around what made Teddy Pendergrass Teddy Pendergrass. Close the Door was built around exactly that. The song that Gamble and Huff brought to Teddy in 1978 was built on the premise of the voice being present, close, speaking directly to a single person rather than performing to a crowd. The instruction of the title, Close the Door, was an invitation to privacy, to the specific kind of intimate space that the voice created when it was doing what it did best. The lyric did not ask the voice to be powerful. It asked the voice to be present. Teddy Pendergrass's voice was never more powerful than when it was being present. Sigma Sound Studios in Philadelphia was where Philadelphia soul was made, where the O'Jays had recorded Backstabbers and For the Love of Money, where Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes had made If You Don't Know Me By Now, where the specific sound of a city's musical identity had been captured across hundreds of sessions in rooms that had been shaped by the music made in them. The studio had a warmth that was the accumulated product of years of specific music being made by musicians who understood what the space required. Teddy knew the room. He had been in it before, with the Blue Notes, on enough occasions that the familiarity itself was part of what he brought to the sessions. The musicians assembled for the Close the Door sessions were the best available in Philadelphia's studio world, the rhythm section. Players and arrangers who had been part of the Philadelphia International Sound since the beginning, who understood what Gamble and Huff were building in the production and what the song needed from them. The arrangement Gamble and Huff had constructed was not complicated. It was not designed to be complicated. What Close the Door required was space, the specific, kind of musical space in which Teddy Pendergrass's voice could do what it did, when it had room to be itself rather than compete with the production around it. Teddy walked in with the song already. In him, had absorbed the material the way he absorbed material that was right for him, quickly and completely, the melody and the lyric settling into the voice in the specific way that happens when the fit between a singer and a song is genuine rather than forced. He sang it from the inside, from the place where the lyric stopped being someone else's words and became the thing he was actually saying, to the specific person the song was addressed to, in the specific private register that the title invited. Close the Door, and what was on the other side of the door, what Gamble and Huff heard in the playback, was the record they had been trying to make since Teddy's first solo single. The frustration of two underperforming records was over. Close the Door was exactly what the voice needed and exactly what the voice gave back. Close the Door was released on May 4th, 1978, as the lead single from Teddy's second solo album, Life is a Song Worth Singing. It entered the R&B chart and climbed to number 1, where it stayed for 2 weeks, his first number 1 since Wake Up Everybody with the Blue Notes in 1975. On the Billboard Hot 100, it reached number 25. In the United Kingdom, it was released as a double-sided single alongside Only You, peaking at number 41. The album itself reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B album chart and number 11 on the Billboard 200. It was nominated for Favorite Soul R&B Album at the American Music Awards in 1979. The commercial performance told part of the story. The other part was told by what happened to the recording in the decades that followed. Close the Door has been sampled 45 times by artists working across R&B, hip-hop, and soul. Mary J. Blige took the track's specific combination of voice and production and used it as the foundation for All Night Long on My Life, one of the defining records of her career and one of the most celebrated R&B albums of the 1990s. 3LW used it for Neva Get Enuf. The sampling history of a record is one way of measuring what it contains. A record that gets sampled once has something useful in it. A record that gets sampled 45 times across 30 years has something essential, something that artists working in different decades and different subgenres all reached for when they needed a specific quality that they could not generate from scratch, and that Close the Door contained in a form that survived extraction and placement into new contexts. What it contained was the voice, but the voice in a specific relationship with the material, the right song for the right voice. Not a song that showcased the voice by asking it to be powerful, but a song that gave the voice permission to be itself, to close the distance between the singer and the listener in the specific way that Teddy Pendergrass closed it when the material allowed him to. Gamble and Huff had understood this. They had gone back to the writing room after 2 singles that gave the voice material it had to lift, and they had written a song that the voice could inhabit instead. The result went to number 1. It has been sampled 45 times. It is, 47 years after it was recorded at Sigma Sound in Philadelphia, still recognizable as the specific thing it was on May 4th, 1978. A voice, a song, a room, and the meeting of all three, in the particular way that produces something that lasts. Teddy Pendergrass found out he was a singer because Harold Melvin happened to be in a lobby at the wrong time on the right night. He found out what he could do with a song because Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff watched 2 singles underperform and understood that the voice deserved better material. Close the Door was that material. It went to number 1 on the R&B chart and stayed there for 2 weeks. It has been sampled 45 times across 3 decades. It is, 47 years after it was recorded at Sigma Sound in Philadelphia, still recognizable as the specific thing it was on May 4th, 1978. A voice, a song, a room, and the meeting of all three in the particular way that produces something that lasts long after the moment of its making. That is what the right song for the right voice produces. Not just a hit, not just a number one, something that keeps being useful, that keeps being reached for by artists working in different decades and different genres who need the specific quality that Teddy Pendergrass and Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff made together in Philadelphia in 1938. The intimacy, the presence, the voice that closes the door and speaks directly to the person listening, as if the song was written for them and nobody else. Teddy Pendergrass gave it back to the world as that, and the world has been using it ever since. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe. Every day, we tell the stories behind the music, including the ones about what happens when the right song finally meets the right voice. Hit the like button if you believe that Close the Door is one of the most important recordings in the history of Philadelphia soul. And tell us in the comments, did you know that Close the Door has been sampled 45 times? Because Teddy Pendergrass walked into Sigma Sound in 1978 with a song that Gamble and Huff wrote specifically for his voice, and he gave it back to the world as something that keeps being useful. We'll see you in the next one.